Hello, good morning, good evening, whatever time you're watching this. Happy March, welcome in. We're probably like a fair bit into March at the time you're seeing this, but welcome to February's reading wrap up. I feel like I can't get my microphone placement right, so sorry if it keeps moving. I'm gonna try out a few different positions with it and hopefully it doesn't affect the sound too much. I think that should be okay just there. I just don't really like the way it looks on my clothes, but it sounds so much better, and if I clip it on, I feel like it stretches the neck of my t-shirt. Anyway, welcome to February's reading wrap up. My name's Charlotte. If you've not been over to my channel before, I make some bookish content amongst some other content like vlogs. I do a few sit down chatty videos. It's just a bit of everything over on this channel really. We're on to our second reading wrap up of the year. So we've already finished February, and by God, I read 10 books in February. That is not as much as it sounds because a lot of them were very short books. So that kind of padded up my numbers a little bit. I read 10 books in February, which is actually really a lot for me. I'm usually sat anywhere from between the 6 to 8 mark. 4 of them were physical, 6 were digital. Although that sounds wrong. I feel like I should have had more physical. When I say digital, I mean Kindle books as well. I didn't do any audiobooks this month. I'm having a bit of an off phase with audiobooks at the moment. I'm just not really enjoying them as much. I'm finding it hard to find ones that I like. So that does bring me to a grand total of 17 books read for the year so far. I don't have a reading target and I don't tend to set one. So we're just kind of seeing how we go, seeing what I enjoy. It's going quite well so far. I feel like I've had a good start to my reading year. A mixed start, but I've had some books that I've actually really enjoyed. And without further ado, let's get into the reviews. If you see me glancing down at any point, it's because I make like rough notes on my laptop. So sorry, I'm not very good at eye contact at the best of times anyway, like neurodivergency stuff, but it's because I'm referencing my notes to make sure I don't miss any of my points. So the first book I read for February was Quicksilver by Hart, and this is a fantasy romance. I didn't actually reference the pronunciation guide before I started sitting down and recording, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but we have our main character, Cyrus Fane. Cyrus? I'm gonna say Cyrus because it makes the most sense to me like that. Cyrus Fane lives in the desert where her people are kept thirsty and poor. She is part of one of the poorest districts in the city. She works in a forge and daily she just tries to keep her strange and unusual powers hidden so that she can continue to steal from the Undying Queen and go under the radar unnoticed. Her secrets begin to unravel. She's caught and faced with death. A portal opens to another realm and a big, mysterious, hulking, murderous stranger comes out of it, grabs her and whisks her off. Takes her through the gateway to a land of snow and ice where the Fae are real, and she's landed in the middle of a centuries-old conflict. She binds herself to Kingfisher, who's the guy that grabbed her and took her through the portal. He has a really shitty attitude, a big touch of death about him, and an alchemist's magic. Also his own agenda when it comes to protecting his own people. Sorry, I feel like that was a really bad synopsis because this is quite like a twisty-turny fantasy book. It has been a really long time since I picked up a fantasy romance. If you've stuck around for quite a long time, you know that I really used to love fantasy romance, and I've just kind of gone off it over the previous years. And it's very unlike me now to pick up a fantasy romance that's quite so popular on TikTok, but I did see that 2 mutuals of mine really enjoyed the book. So I picked it up and I'm really pleased to say that I did quite enjoy this. I had a lot of fun reading this and there was a lot of enjoyment, and I think that's something I haven't had from a fantasy romance in a really long time. So I think where I had such low expectations as well, it really just put a little bit of pep in my step. It was by no means perfect, but I can say confidently that this was the first fantasy romance I've picked up in a very long time that I genuinely had a good time with. This definitely is quite trope heavy in that it uses quite a lot of popular plot devices and trendy tropes that we've seen skyrocket other fantasy romances to success. And at times I do think in this book that can come off as a little bit clunky. Essentially, I will say that this is another fantasy romance where a plainly beautiful, sassy, strong woman, fae-hating, murderous human gets whisked off to an icy and cold realm where the Fae live by another hot, hulking, murderous, dark-haired shadow daddy. Surprise, surprise, he eventually warms to her. Fantasy romance-wise, I do feel like that combination exactly is very worn out, but you know what? For some reason here, it just did what it needed to do. Character-wise, Kingfisher's character to me actually felt a little bit more developed than Cyrus's character. I liked him more than I liked her. He felt maybe a bit more like fully rounded as a character, although do you know what? I fucking hate that name. What? Kingfisher? Like what? I understand because it makes sense in context of like the rest of the characters' names, like Everlane, because I think Everlane's nice. But Kingfisher, what? I think maybe her character was like a little bit too juvenile for me, and I'm just not gonna lie, I really hate to see a good woman make just like terrible, terrible, terrible decisions one after the other. I did really like the other characters, so like Carrie and Evelyn. I've forgotten the blonde counterpart, him, the warrior guy. They, for me, added an extra dimension to the book that was more enjoyable, and I think it was nicer to read because it felt like more formed than a lot of fantasy romances do. I liked the banter between them, I liked the relationships, and I liked the world building. I thought the world building was good. I do feel like on reflection, their romance arc was just like basically insta-love. To me, like slow burn is not 400 pages like enemies to lovers, you know. There needs to be more yearning for it to be a slow burn. It definitely wasn't a slow burn. I've seen people describe it as that, but despite my little qualms with that, that is really just me being picky. I did really enjoy it. I think I liked it for what it was. Honestly, I cannot tell you the last time I actually picked up a fantasy romance and enjoyed it. I've really struggled with it. It's just very oversaturated for me now, and admittedly it's my own fault. I binged it like about a couple of years ago. I read like every single Kindle Unlimited series you could possibly get your hands on. They obviously just all just blur into one. The quality of the writing of a lot of them isn't great. I think if you're not bored of this kind of format yet, or you're looking for like a slightly more refreshing read in this genre, try this one. I'm looking forward to seeing where the second book takes us. And you know what, something about, I think the plot line reminded me a little bit of These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan, although I didn't like that book. I won't read the second one. Just something about the plot and Ceres's character, it was reminiscent of that. The next book I read this month was a physical book, and it was Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. This is thriller / mystery. Camille Preaker is a reporter from Chicago who's just been sent back to her hometown to follow up on a rather troubling assignment. Assignment being the unsolved murder of a preteen girl, and another teenage girl has just gone missing. It's a great assignment for someone who's just come out of a psychiatric hospital and she hasn't spoken to her neurotic mother or her just like kooky half-sister for years. So she's posted up in her childhood bedroom. She's not allowed to leave till she's got a report. She's battling her own demons, and she has to push until this puzzle unravels and somehow also stay sane at the same time. Wowee. So I'm not a thriller girly. Thriller is a genre I usually avoid, but I'm willing to make exceptions for Gillian Flynn. I've been recommended this a few times actually. So I asked for it for Christmas. I'd seen rave reviews about it. So many of you who follow me had specifically recommended me this book as well. It feels like a very personalized recommendation. I feel like you're starting to understand my taste in terms of dark books. I'm going to draw a parallel really quickly, and I really hope that you know what I'm talking about. The reading experience of this for me was really, really similar to season 1 of True Detective with Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson. Please tell me you know what I'm talking about. One of the best seasons of television I've ever seen in my life. If you haven't watched it, by the way, I really, really recommend it, especially if you liked this book. We're talking long, hot, lazy days in a sweaty, sticky town. A very, very weird small town that's somehow in the middle of like the opioid crisis belt, right? A reporter that is lost in the source, like doing their own demons, digging too deep, and something very weird going on with the kids of the town. There is something like so unsettling about it. Something about this like tight-knit community that won't let anyone in. I'm talking about the show and the book, by the way, but this like tight community that won't crack open. The mood and the atmosphere was very, very uncomfortable, and that's quite what I enjoyed about it. Say I avoid thriller, and I think the reason I like this in Gillian Flynn's reads is this feels beyond what I would usually consider a thriller, like my personal consideration of a thriller. It's darker to me, and it's not darker in the graphic violence kind of sense. It can be, I guess, some are more, some are less, but there's something about the characters that are darker than like a usual detective murder mystery type novel for me. Gillian Flynn's characters have this like dark weight, heaviness to them that I think is what tips it over the edge. I think it's very uncomfortable reading, and that's probably why I like her writing so much. Yeah, like I said, I usually avoid this genre, but there's always an exception to every rule. I believe this is her debut as well, and I do think this is a stunning debut novel. I believe this was released in 2010, and I will say I do think it's aged out a bit. 2006, reissued 2010. Maybe our standard for like shocking books now is much different, but I can see that this would have been very impactful for the time that it was released, and I felt like it would have been, yeah, just much more. I feel like given what's popular now and what's commonly written and what's trendy, this just could get lost in the fray, but I do feel like this is a bit of an OG. If you've seen the TV show, let me know if it's worth watching. I like Amy Adams. The next book I read was a Kindle book, and it was Golden Sun by Pierce Brown, and this is the second book in the Red Rising saga. So I read Red Rising in January last month. You can go back and watch my review of that. This book is of the dystopian sci-fi genre. This one's not going to be spoiler free to some extent. So when I talk about books in a series, I try not to talk about the actual events that happen in a book, but there is some notion of spoiling it because I have to talk about what happens in the previous book. So if you are reading this series and you haven't read book 2, while I won't explicitly say what happens, it will probably allude to what happens at the end of book 1, if that makes sense. So most books that I read multiple series of won't be spoiler free, but again, I'll tell you, I'm rambling now. So yeah, if you aren't wanting to listen to this because you have intentions to read it, skip forward. I'll put a timestamp on the screen of where you can skip to, and I'll give you a couple of seconds to get away. This one is quite a vague synopsis. Darrow has sacrificed his previous life working in the mines as a Red, which is considered the lowest of all social classes, to infiltrate the privileged realm of the Golds who are at the top. He found out his society was built on lies and that the only true way to reach liberation is through revolution. In his new life, and much to his surprise, Darrow has found a sense of love and respect and friendship among his rivals. Despite all that, he now has to work towards waging a war that will tear the entire system apart. So I mostly enjoyed book 1. Like I said, the full review is in the January reading review. But this is where it started to drag a little bit here for me. I really struggled reading this book. Book 2 has completely launched this out of young adult territory for me. I think if anyone classes this as young adult, you're completely wrong. There is nothing young adult about this series. I was struggling with that in book 1 actually. It's not young adult at all. With Golden Sun, we become much more focused on the politics and the military element of it all and the kind of like war planning aspect. I found it difficult to follow heavy politics-based books in the past, especially when it's kind of dystopian or set in the future. I can find it a little bit just difficult to read for me. It's dense, isn't it? It's dense literature a lot of the time. I don't think it was bad. I just think it was a hard read. Like I just needed to focus a lot more, so I went a lot slower with it. What I liked about that though is the first book was so intense, but book 2 really emphasizes the delicateness that's needed with politics and the kind of politics that Darrow is actually very inexperienced in because he has not grown up in that system, unlike his fellow Golds. It kind of like widens the gap. In book 1, it was all about like brute strength and like trials and a physical show of intimidation, but they were kids in book 1, and now they've aged up and they're kind of entering real society and they're getting these placements as these knights and, you know, these ambassadors. It highlights his lack and it highlights his difference in that he hasn't grown up in this society, but obviously a lot of them don't know that. He's inexperienced and so is everyone else because they're just children's turned to adults, but he is inexperienced in a different way. Darrow's characterization is insufferable. It's becoming insufferable. I know he's really quite young in this, like maybe 18, 20 by the time the book ends. I can't really remember. But he is just completely fucking insufferable. I know this is a point and part of his character development, but I just don't know how much more I can take. And that's what kind of made me unsure on whether I was going to continue into book 3. I'm just not sure how many more bad decisions of his I can take. He is so incredibly self-obsessed that at some points I was, dare I say it, almost wishing on his downfall. When I was about 50% through, I was at the point where I was pretty unsure that I was going to read book 3. I was like, I don't know if I will. But actually having got to the end, I'm probably going to read book 3. I'm not sure when. I don't think it will be in March. I might do it in April. It might be a book that I crack out on the flight at the end of the month because I've got a long haul flight. It's a difficult review for me because actually having done some research, so many people preferred Golden Sun to Red Rising, which I feel like Red Rising was a great start to the series, although I could see that there were a lot of problems with it. But I'm not sure I enjoyed Golden Sun more than Red Rising. I definitely won't read all 5 books. So my understanding is that it's like a trilogy and then a few years later, the other 2 are released and they're supposed to like take part in the same universe, but many years later. So they're not a necessary read. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to see how long the 3rd one is because if it's like 800 pages, I probably won't read it. I still stand firm with the fact that Pierce Brown as an author writes in a way that I completely understand and quite relish, that no character is fucking safe. The reader is not safe at any point, but I think in this book, the treachery and the levels of double crossing did become a little bit hard to follow at points because it was just so much double crossing. It was getting a little bit hard to keep up with, but yeah, I will persevere, I think. I will head on to book 3. So the next book I read was a physical book. I don't have it with me because I borrowed it from the library, so it's been returned, and it was Farenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Again, this is another dystopian sci-fi set in the future kind of vibe. So our main character, Guy Montag, is a fireman, but he's not a fireman in the sense of the word that we know a fireman to be. His job is not to put fires out, but it is to burn books. Books have become an illegal commodity to read, to own, to store, to have. He's never given any thought to his job or the ramifications of his job until he met his neighbour. She introduces him to the concept that in the past, people read books and people learned and people knew stuff and weren't scared of knowing stuff. People had questions and people theorised openly and with each other, and no one lived in fear. The guy decides to steal some books and read them. This is a classic, and I know that. And honestly, I really wish that I'd read it in school, because I feel like with a lot of classics, a lot of people's reading experience of them as a younger adult or a teenager directly correlates with their love for it as an adult. I had the same experience with The Bell Jar. I didn't read The Bell Jar when I was younger, and it really didn't have the impact on me that I'd heard it had on so many others. And I think that's what happened with me here. I really understand how important the messaging is of this book and how vital this is to read. And that's why I picked it up. I saw it and I've never seen the physical copy before, so I thought, yeah, let's have it. But it just didn't land for me or impact me in the way that I really thought it would, or that I was hoping for, especially as someone that considers reading and knowledge and theorising and like all of that kind of stuff such an important and integral part of who I am as a person. It just really didn't impact me in the way that I thought it would. Actually, in the way that I was hoping it would. Futuristic dystopian styles can be a bit hit or miss for me, but the style of the writing and how like abstract the future element of it was, and just like being dropped into this abstract futuristic kind of world, it made the writing feel really clunky for me. I get that it's a stylistic choice, but it just wasn't like enjoyable. That aspect of it is definitely to do more with my reading comprehension and like how I gel with that style. The somewhat like vague symbolism and messaging of this book is, I think, what gives it longevity. I guess the current consensus is that social media and technological advancements are all kind of making us stupid and frying our brains and making us incapable of critical thinking, and there's this whole like argument about anti-intellectualism, and I do agree with some of it. Obviously, I'm not going to cover like the nuance of it all now. I guess what's relevant about that is that it's all like frying our attention spans so hard that we will eventually no longer be able to pick up a book and read it and enjoy it, and that they'll become obsolete. I know people have been saying books are going to become obsolete for years, and they never do. I think it's a bit fatalistic, and although that there are definitely some statistics that would back up that, you know, our attention spans are fucked, our receptors are frazzled because we like 0.1 second videos now, we can't sit down and watch anything. And yeah, while there are statistics that back up what I'm saying there, I personally think that the censorship angle is more like frightening and more relevant in the current climate, as it were. I don't know. I see the purpose of the book. I see the messaging of the book. I see the importance of the book. I see what the book was trying to do. And in my opinion and my reading experience, it just did it badly. I feel really bad saying that, but it's fine, because who cares? Because if we all said the same thing about books, it would be so boring. The next book I read was a Kindle book, and it was Blood Feast by Vela Roth. And this is a fantasy romance. This is part of the Blood Grey series, and it's book number 8. Because it's book number 8, this is not a spoiler-free review. Again, I won't talk too in depth about the actual events of the book or the ending, but I might. And if you plan to read the Blood Grey series, skip this. Spoiler's going to be in the synopsis, so here is your chance to skip away, timestamp on the screen. Cassia has completed her transformation as a newly gifted Hesperin. She has magic that no one else has ever seen. Immortality has granted her safety from the gift collector, who is the necromancer that would not leave her alone, that pursued her over hill and high valley in human life. So with Leo's brothers, Mac and Lyros, they seek to uncover the centuries-old conspiracy that the collector has been brewing. When I tell you I have been invested in this fucking series, and I feel like there's only like one person on my YouTube that's read this series. I've forgotten your username, I'm so sorry, but I know you've read it and I hope you're watching this. You might not have read book 8 yet, so you might not be watching this. I am fucking invested in this series, like so deep. Let me just tell you a little bit about this series in case you're thinking about reading it. I love this series so deeply. There is just something something about her writing and something about Cassia and Leo and Orthos, the romance of it all, like the politics of it all. They are very long books. This is a heavy time investment. It's a very slow burn. And if you don't have any intentions of reading this, I've probably spoiled it for you already. A Hesperin is a vampire. That's what they call them. You're a Hesperin if you're a vampire, and the humans call them heretics. You get the vibe. This book came out in June and I really put off reading it purely because I wanted to make it last. I am very happy to be back in Orthos with Leo and Cassia. The series is just so yummy to me. It's so comforting. It's very cozy, and I think like truly a very safe series. The way that love and passion and devotion and like goodness of heart and pure intentions is written in this story is so warming to me. There's something very special about it. I think of all fictional vampires, the Hesperins and Orthos might be my favourite. I know it's quite a big statement to make. I'm so happy that Cassia's finally been gifted, thank God. Although I am kind of annoyed they didn't get to enjoy it more, and I'm kind of annoyed we didn't spend more of this book in Orthos, because that's kind of like what we were all hoping for, right? We just wanted them to live a happy and safe life in Orthos, and in this book they barely spent any fucking time in Orthos, which was disappointing. It was challenging for me as a reader as well, because I've been tired of the trouble and strife and the drama they've gone through, and this drama feels like almost a bit out of character and almost a bit unnecessary. It is so well suited to being a Hesperin as well, although I did find myself getting frustrated with her in this book because, again, I feel like she makes some very selfish, self-sacrificing decisions, uninformed decisions that are just not for the best of her and her grace. Her self-sacrificial nature in this book felt like ramped up, but I suppose we wouldn't have had a plot without it. I missed seeing Orthos, and I missed the books that were heavily based there, and the characters that we see in this book is a very small subsection of actually how many characters there are, and I was hoping to learn a little bit more about Leo's family and like the rest of the world. So I think that's what I felt like this book was lacking, but it wasn't bad by any means. And like I said earlier, just to like revisit it, I feel like some of the decisions the characters made were potentially like out of character of them, and I think that's what made this book probably one of the lesser interesting books to me. Mac and Leros revealing their secret on their avowal night, it didn't feel like true to them. Cassia's constant self-sacrifice and like, you know, not taking her grace into consideration, all of those things just felt like they were being used as a plot driver in a way that didn't feel like super authentic to the books. But it's been a really long time since I read the books. I do hope because of that the 9th book is the last book, because I'm a little bit concerned the series will evolve beyond something that I know and love. 8 books is getting very, very long, and each book, some of them are like nearly 1,000 pages. I think this one was maybe 700, but it just felt very, very long. So this was another Kindle book, and it was Blood Tribute by Vela Roth, which is also a fantasy romance, and this was a fantasy romance novella. So this is a Blood Grace novella, the series that I just previously read. It's very loosely related. It's technically a prequel, but you don't need to read it. Our female protagonist, Nora, is the last heir in a very, very, very long line of holy knights. But obviously being a woman, she's in danger of losing everything her family has worked hard for if she's not married by the autumn equinox. This unfortunately is looking unlikely, but she is taking matters into her own hands. There is one way she can save her family's castle, and this is by becoming a dame in her own right. And to do this, she needs to slay an immortal Hesperin. And to trick a Hesperin into drinking her poisoned blood, she promises him a tribute of her blood for 3 nights. I picked this up immediately after finishing Blood Feast because I saw that it was like recommended to me. It was very, very short, and I didn't really know what I wanted to read because I finished at like 10 p.m. at night. I didn't want to crack into a new book. I was actually hoping that it would be about one of the characters' life, like pre-Orthos, like pre-reading, if that makes sense. And it was very, very loosely related, but it wasn't any characters that I know or recognise from the earlier series. And I'm pretty sure it's set like actually centuries earlier. So yeah, it's no one we've ever actually met. This is a very, very, very fast-paced, short, sweet, spicy, sexy novella about like another human Hesperin connection. I don't really feel like it's representative of what the series will actually give you, but I do think it's a good representation of tone and characterization and writing, and actually a good mini introduction to Orthos if you would like to dip your toe in and not commit before reading 8 books. It's like a mini enemies to lovers. It's like hardly enemies to lovers, but it's like a mini little we don't like each other, now we're doing it. And I really like the angry humanity of Nora's character characters. It takes me back to the first book because all humans hate Hesperans. They're all just very misunderstood. But I think it's a bit fast, but also I'm used to the incredibly slow pacing of the other books. So the next book I read was a physical book, and it was Homesick for Another World by Tessa Moshfegh. This book has good flop. It's like a very floppy book. This is contemporary fiction short stories. Hard to summarize short stories, but I think in this character-driven set of short stories, all of Tessa's characters are yearning. They're yearning for something, they're chasing, they're seeking, they're searching, but something is missing. There is an element that they are all somewhat unsteady on their feet, and they are all looking for something better. Almost all of them are looking for something better. They're all very human. Tessa Moshfegh is one of those people that I will almost always read anything she puts out. Actually, my year of rest and relaxation is on the bottom of the pile, controversially, but like I loved Eileen, I loved Lapvona. I think I only have one more book to read by her. I just find something about the plot of her writing irresistible. I've said this before, but she has such a nasty way of writing about human bodies. She has such a disdain for the necessary physical functions that we all need to carry out to live. I've seen this in every single book I've read of hers. There is something repulsive about the human body. I do think she has a fixation on fatness. There is also like a lot of talk of acne and acne scars in this. And I feel like she picks one thing, one physical feature about someone's body, and like dials in on it and makes it one of the most disgusting things you've ever read, but in like a very frank, observing way, not in like a filled with vitriol way. I don't know how to explain it. I think it's the indifference she has about human bodies. It's very distinct. I've come to really like the way she writes in general. I think it's unsympathetic. I think it's unflinching. It's weirdly human, and yeah, I think there is almost like no sentimentality about her characters. Like none of them are lovable, but because of that, you almost find them slightly endearing because they are just so human. I do think, however, with the short stories, that condensed in like several stories back to back became quite repetitive, and I think the strength of her writing is not best showcased in back-to-back stories. The ones in here that were good were really good, but the others were just like mid or just forgettable. But I guess that is just the way of short stories. The ones that stood out to me were Bettering Myself, which is the first one, Mr. Wu, which is the second one, and The Beach Boy. Other than that, I did just find it quite repetitive. Perhaps when someone's writing style is so distinctive and you read quite a lot of their stories back to back, you are going to pick up patterns, and you are going to see the turns of phrase they lean towards. You are going to see the sentence structure they favour. You are going to see the words they favour. I don't know, I think I've got to stop reading short stories. When was the last time I read a good collection of short stories? I still love her books, and I will read whatever she puts out, but this just is like a miss for me. Next up, I read The Lamb by Lucy Rose. I read this on my Kindle, and it's a horror book. Margot and her mother live off-grid in a cabin in the woods, and they live a simple life. They live off the land, they wait for unwilling strays to wander off the road and come to their house. I'm referring to people when I talk about strays, but you know, they take them into their home, they wine them, they dine them. Margot's mother does sometimes 69 them. They have a pleasant evening with them, and then they kill them, roast them and eat them. That is until a beautiful stray called Eden turns up at their door, and this one is different, and Margot's mother wants to keep her. The family dynamic starts to change as they grow up, and Eden and Margot's mother become hungrier. Sorry, that was kind of a jokey synopsis, but I couldn't resist. I went into this one kind of blind. I honestly, I think I'm behind the times because I hadn't really heard of this. I picked it up, I looked up what was popular at the moment, and so many of you messaged me on Instagram like, oh my God, I cannot wait to hear about this. Let me know what you think. This is my favourite book. Just rave reviews. So I was really surprised. You might have seen my initial thoughts already on my Instagram. I posted just like a quick fire because so many people were asking about it. So I've had some time to think a bit more about it. I don't think they've evolved much, but I'll expand. Long story short is that the premise of this book was good, but ultimately for me, it was a bit lackluster. I think as far as horror goes, I never really at any point felt the sense of terror or dread that I usually prefer to experience from my horrors. Cannibalism as a metaphor for love is super trendy at the moment. It's very saturated. It's the done thing, isn't it? and it's popular alongside this women's hunger element. And I feel like I'm personally reaching a point where this is a little bit overdone for me. And having said that, I do know that actually it is my responsibility as a reader to take a step back from that kind of trope, those kind of plot drivers. The beginning was enough to pique my interest. The beginning was quite hooking. Although, do you know what? This is just a side note. Anyone else that's read this, was this obvious to you that this was set in Cumbria in the UK? I feel like that's completely gone over my fucking head. I think it's me being stupid. I just wanted to check. It's really obvious that I made an assumption based on a set of like what I thought were key indicators that this was set in the US. So like the isolation of the cabin, the forest, the like babbling brook of it all. I'm just like, yeah, nowhere in the UK is that isolated. Like obviously I get it is, but usually horror that's set in the UK is set in like the moors and the dales and stuff. So to have a forest felt very strange. Also things like the school bus, the fact that she calls her mother Mama, like M-A-M-A, that felt unusual because that's not really, to me anyway, or at least where I live, a term of endearment that I see often. I think it's that and the fact that I've read like quite a lot of US based horror that it just went like that into my brain. But I feel really stupid now because having read it, I was like, oh yeah, it's definitely not the UK. And this was like, it's in Cumbria. That's actually not like a genuine criticism on the book. That is just me like observing. I never want to read the word mama again. And also this book made me really, really hungry. Not in like a cannibalism way, like the fingers and stuff and like the toes made me feel sick, but the way she describes pie, good God, that's how I should have known that it was English, or the pie talk. They just kept talking about succulent, mouth-watering, like flaky, rich puff pie pastry, and oh my God, I'm actually like really hungry while I'm filming this. So maybe a pie's on the cards tonight. Vegetarian though, I don't eat meat. The middle felt a bit clumsy to me and a little bit repetitive. I honestly think it could have been about 100 pages shorter. I think the clunky writing is probably linked in with the fact that the narrator is obviously a child, but I don't know, I just felt like this could have been avoided. It just became, to me, endless repetitive hunger and endless like sapphic entanglements in the kitchen. This is the kind of book that I've spoken about on my channel before where I think like, is it good or is it just shocking? And you know what? Two things can exist at once. There are books that are good and shocking, but I do think it's harder to separate and unravel that distinction when you are shocked. I will say I'm pleased with where the end went. I was shocked at that. Not shocked, but I was like not expecting the ending. Overall, I think the book was just very much okay, and I think that I'm more surprised at quite how many rave reviews there are, just personally because this wasn't my experience with the book. I just think the book was okay, you know. I don't think it was bad. I don't think it was good. Clearly, I am the anomaly here. Due to the kinds of themes present, it just felt like a book I'd read before. I don't mean that in to be like it's felt like a specific book, but it just, the culmination of everything just felt like the kind of book I've read before. The next book I read was on my Kindle and it was To Be Devoured by Sarah Tantlinger. Andy is obsessed with the vultures that circle the sky in the area near her house, and she becomes obsessed with watching them. She needs to know what they know, and she needs to know what carrion tastes like. And as her obsession increases in intensity, even her girlfriend and her therapist can't help her to understand what's going on. Her anger-induced blackouts start to send her down an unforgivable path. This feels like a stark contrast to my previous read in that this is one of my favourite books ever, and it is also lesbian cannibalism. I love gay horror. I love gay horror. This is one of my favourite books, and it's actually my second time rereading it. I don't reread a lot anymore, so it was a nice visit to something I already know, although it turns out I'd forgotten a lot of it. This is short, 100 pages, 110. I forgot how fucking disgusting this book is. It's a stomach turner. It is one of those books that I have no choice but to enjoy it purely from how insane it is. Let me talk about the reasons that I like it. The writing, despite its depravity, is very magnetic, and I think that's why, even though it's so short, it feels so compelling, because as we descend into Andy's spiral of ill mental health, the decline in her sanity almost just feels like, oh yeah, of course that's what would happen. Like, it feels normal. It feels like a normal progression. You don't really realize how insane it's getting until you're like, oh yeah, that was crazy. But it's just like, okay, yeah, sure, that makes sense because she's going crazy. Like, what? No, it doesn't. It's fucking sick. Really, the first time I read this, it was a punch for book. I read it in one sitting really, really late at night. And I read this in 2 sittings, same day on the reread. And I think admittedly, the first time the book just washed over me, it just happened to me. I didn't really stop to like assess it and assess the themes. I couldn't really see past the yuckiness of it. I'd forgotten like 2 or 3 actually quite significant, disgusting, like stomach turning things that happened in this. And what's interesting is that I think now I've done the reread, I understand that this is like more than the disgustingness of the acts in the book. It's a commentary about like loss and grief and rejection and depression and like ill mental health and what it can do to you. Andy is just so angry and so lonely, and there's this line, I can't remember it and I'm not going to go find it, but it's about how she hates everyone in their perfect families and their perfect lives, and she resents everyone. And then like right at the beginning, we have her girlfriend rejecting her very, very carefully, deep and meaningful, but also like quite disturbing gift. She rejects this gift, and it ends up being like the catalyst for the events of the book. And it all just begins to spiral, but the gift has been given with love. And it's just, yeah, it's really interesting to me. And yeah, this book is ultimately disgusting, but it's about grief and loss and how that can like, you know, like how sand irritates in an oyster and makes it a pearl, or like carbon like crushes and makes it a diamond. Well, like grief and loss have been like that into fucking insanity, batshit crazy. I'm gonna say don't read this if you're not an accustomed horror reader and you don't have an iron stomach. I was eating when I read this and I had to stop. Yeah, there's just a couple of scenes. I think as I get a bit older, I'm getting a bit more squeamish. It is one of my favourite books, don't judge me. Last but certainly not least is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, and this is lit fic. It is 1985. And we're in a small Irish town with family man and coal merchant Bill Furlong. He lives a quiet life with his wife and his 5 daughters, and it's not a glamorous life, but they owe no debts, there is food on the table, and they are making ends meet, and that's what's important to them. In the run-up to Christmas, he is delivering coal to the local convent, and he makes a discovery which he's not really sure how to take. It leads him to assess his way of thinking and to confront the complicit silences in a town that is controlled by the church. I was nervous to read this because I've seen raves about this. I have a tendency to really struggle with literary fiction. I'm trying really hard to kind of get my lit fic muscle a bit better developed this year. I think it's usually as well because I don't love a character-driven book. But wow, this softly, quietly, and gently blew me away. And I feel like even to say it blew me away is too strong. It lifted me away on a gentle breeze, a gentle snowy breeze. What quality has Claire Keegan suffused into this writing to make such a short story so gentle but so impactful? It feels like a cold, crisp, clean drink of water, breath of fresh air on a winter's morning. It feels like drinking from a glacier. And while it's definitely not 5 stars to me, I can see why people like this so much. To read about a good man, like a good man, yeah, like a genuinely good man with a desire to treat others well and like do right and do the right thing, and like watch his journey as he no longer wants to be like a pedestrian, he wants to be like an active doer that does the right thing. I don't know, it's just kind of refreshing. A good hard-working man, Savannah, like there's just a quiet heroism. It's just a pleasant book to finish the month on, and honestly, because it's set at Christmas, I kind of wish I'd read it at Christmas because I would have felt like it was really doing up goodwill to all men. There's something so comforting about how like Irish it feels, and obviously the time setting, it's like a hard time for Ireland in the 80s. But yeah, I feel like it was captured realistically, and there were moments that I felt perhaps were maybe a bit like too obvious and a bit too sentimental and like a bit on the nose. But I do think what's been achieved in 100 pages is great. And so I was genuinely surprised at how I liked this, considering this is not usually my kind of read. I'm just looking at the reviews in the back, and Sunday Times like captures it quite nicely, and it says, a snow globe of a story that fits in a whole bustling, striving, yearning world into 114 finely wrought pages. And that for me sums it up. Anyway, that was my February reading wrap up. Let me know what you think. As always, please recommend me books. Tell me if we disagreed. Tell me if you loved any of those. That was a long old reading month for me. I did 10 books in 28 days. Like I said, like loads of them were like this big, but I'm trying to read a lot more short books at the moment because I'd like to compile a recommendations video with short books for you, and I mean like 120 pages under, so that should be coming in the future. I'm not going to say when because you know me, I do the video 6 months later. So I'm not on Goodreads, I am on Storygraph, and I've updated the links in the bio and the description box because I know a lot of you brought to my attention they were wrong because I changed a couple of my usernames, so thank you so much for letting me know. All my socials are in there as well. I post what I'm reading on Instagram like as I I'm reading it, so you can keep more up to date with what I'm reading. Same on Storygraph, you can follow me on there. Thank you so much for watching today. It's been nice to sit down and just like have a chat. This is going to be quite a long video, I fear. So my upload schedule at the moment is every Sunday and every other Wednesday. Have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you on the next video.